Admiral Grace Hopper,
It is me, and I like that introduction. Because it enables me to remind all of you that the first large-scale digital computer in the United States is a Navy computer operated by a Navy crew or naval crew. And lately I've been having to remind people of that. Because there's been a tendency in all of us trying to put it to the early computers. And of course, they didn't even exist yet. So I want you to remember that it was a Navy computer. Lately, I've been hearing two things running all around the country and all over everywhere. One is that we live in a world of change, and the other is that an information is power. I'd like to talk to those two things. First, about change. It's nothing new that this change. Somewhere about 4 or 5 years ago, some so-called experts latched onto the idea that they would write books and make speeches about change and scare people, and they've been making a heck of a lot of money out of it. But there's always been change, and human beings have always been allergic to change. Because it means
learn something new and do things differently just after you got comfortable with the job you had. Probably the most dangerous phrase that anyone can use in the world today is that dreadful one, but we've always done it that way. That's a forbidden phrase in my office, and to emphasize it, I keep a clock which operates entirely counterclockwise. Now, the first day people meet it, they can't tell time. The second day, they discover what used to be 5 of is now 5 after, and they can tell time again. Normally, it isn't until the third day that they suddenly realize there was never any reason why clocks had to run clockwise. Or run counterclockwise. From this point of view, I'd like to give each one of you a very small gift. I'll promise you something. If during the next 12 months, any one of you says, but we've always done it that way, I will instantly materialize beside you, and I will haunt you for 24 hours. Because we must move to the future. We must change our minds. We must move forward. I think there's one way in which I can show you what's happened, at least in the world of computers, in terms of change. When I met Mark I, I reported on the 2nd of July, 1944. So we go all the way back to 1944. Mark I was 51 feet long, 8 feet high, 8 feet deep, in a magnificent glass case. You could walk around inside of her. She had 72 old words of storage. Each word consisted of 23 decimal digits and an algebraic sign. And she had both plus and minus zero. That upsets mathematicians. If you really want to upset a program, feed it minus zero and see what happens. And what's more, she could do 3 additions every single second. 300 milliseconds to do an addition. Sounds pitiful today, yet we must remember it, because she was the first machine that man built that assisted the power of his brain instead of the strength of his arm. Oh, he didn't stop there. He maybe built a lot more computers during World War II.
From 1951, we have came out in that then, the first commercial electronic computer.
We were going 1,000 times faster. We didn't stop there. By 1964, we had this first of the CDC 6400, and it did an addition in 300 nanoseconds. Another 1,000 times faster. Now the question is, do we need another faster computer? 19 question mark, or right now. Do we need the XYZ computer that will add in 300 picoseconds? Another 1,000 times faster? Answer is yes. We need it right now. We're not going to build it the way we've been building. First of all, why do we need it? I can think of 2 major problems which we need that computer. We need far better weather forecasting. We need better long-term weather forecasting. We need a weather computer. There's another area which most people don't think of. I wasn't aware of it until it happened to my sister. She lived in northern New Jersey. They had a water shortage. They limited everybody to 50 gallons of water apiece a day. And they came around and looked at the meters and found that they used more than that. Down in Norfolk, Virginia, they ran short of water. Now, Norfolk draws its water from wells. So they decided they'd better drill a couple more wells. And they got real cute about it. They drilled in the corner of the naval base. But the 2 new wells were in Suffolk County. So Suffolk County sued Norfolk County for stealing their groundwater. Down here in Florida, you pull so much water out of the underlying aquifers that you open sinkholes and dump houses and cars into it. In Tucson, they pull so much out of the underlying aquifer that the city's sinking, so every so often it breaks open under buildings and things. In Colorado, the eastern half of the state's dry, the western half has water. So naturally, the people in the eastern half think it'd be a ducky idea to poke a tunnel through the Rockies and get water from the western half. No way the people in the western half are going to give their water to those nasty old people in the eastern half. It's all in the courts. California, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, West Texas. Who can draw how much water out of which aquifer in which river? The 8 Great Lakes states and the 2 provinces of Canada that abut the Great Lakes have formed a consortium. And they're going to manage the Great Lakes water. And if those darn people down in the Southwest want it, they're going to make them pay for it. One of the biggest jobs ahead of us is going to be to manage water. Can you imagine the engineering job there's going to be? The pipelines, the reservoirs that will have to be built. And then a computer system that will ensure that every resident of the United States gets his fair share of pure water. It's going to be one of the biggest jobs we'll have to do. The reason we don't hear about it is the agencies involved are not glamour agencies. The press is not interested. It's the Forest Service, Reclamation Service, Corps of Engineers, Geological Survey. Nobody pays any attention to what they're saying. There's even been a proposal. We may have to build a pipeline from northern Canada and melt the ice and snow of northern Canada. And yet nobody pays any attention, and we're very close by a problem. well, we're going to need that computer power. We're going to need it in many ways in many places. And I said we're going to have some trouble getting there. And part of it rests on the fact that we've been living in a world of change. When I met my first computer, it added milliseconds. Now, I graduated from college in 1928, had 3 majors, math, physics, and economics. And I thought I knew what a millisecond was. I thought I knew what 1,000th of a second was. And then I met a computer. Pretty soon somebody stuck a finger on one of my programs and said, hey, you wasted 5 microseconds. And I said, so what? What's a microsecond? Well, they told me it's a millionth of a second. I said, show me a microsecond. Nobody would show me a microsecond. In the first place, I didn't know what a million was. The biggest check I'd ever seen was less than $1,000. I didn't know what a million was. If I didn't know what a million was, I didn't know what a millions was. And I fussed and fumed and I got nowhere. Pretty soon over in the engineering building, they started talking about circuits that acted in nanoseconds. Billionth of a second. I didn't know what a billion was. And between you and me and the gate post, I don't think most of those men up on the hill in Washington do either. You don't know what a billion is. How on earth do you know what a billionth is? And I fussed and fumed. Finally, one day, in utter desperation, I called over to the engineering building, and I said, please cut off a nanosecond and send it over to me. And the reason I did that was I had finally figured out how to relate these things so that I could understand them. 1 second. Well, in 1 second, light or electricity in space would travel 186,000 miles. So 1 second was 186,000 miles. Well, that meant that a millisecond, 1,000 of that was 186 miles. In fact, I could draw a circle around Washington or Philadelphia, and I knew what a millisecond was, with everything within 186 miles. That meant that a microsecond was 1,000 of that, which turns out to be about 984 feet or something like that. Then a nanosecond was 1,000 of that, which turned out to be 11.78 inches. So what I asked for when I asked for a nanosecond was, I asked for a piece of wire, which was 11.78 inches long, 1 nanosecond. And I've got some here for you. I'm not sure if I have enough for all of you, but I've got quite a lot of nanoseconds. And I'm not sure that you all realize that nanoseconds come different colors. So be able to pick your colors. And it's about the only way you can explain to people why 2 pieces of equipment have to be close together. But you're going to lose a whole nanosecond. They're very useful for explaining why equipment has to be closely related. And another good use is that I had an admiral who wanted to know why it took so damn long to send a message via satellite. And I had to point out to him that between here and the satellite there were a very large number of nanoseconds. Go to McDonald's or Wendy's or Hardee's, they have little packets of picoseconds. Actually, they say pepperoni, but they're really picoseconds. On the other hand, I didn't feel that I could grade all of the software places. I mean, short order cooking. So I persuaded Dad to picoseconds. They assure me there are 1,000 each one, but I don't think they counted them. In any case, I have some packets of picoseconds. Some of you will be able to get picoseconds. Nanoseconds, I've got a real problem. Because even flour or powdered sugar are not small enough. 1,000th of a picosecond. I'll just say there's a nanosecond. But there's change. We went from 186 miles with our milliseconds down to the picoseconds, to the things that matter to us. And that does show what happened in 40 years in change in the world of computers. And we do need the more powerful computers, which will operate in picoseconds and nanoseconds. We've got to begin to think about it and become aware of it. I said we're going to have some trouble getting there, and this is what we're up against. Things have to get smaller and smaller. You have to act faster. It's not alone in your field that you need more information, better information, but all the world wants better information faster to make decisions. So we've got to speed up those computers. We've got a very real problem. Part of it came from this fact. When the computers first appeared, everybody went out and bought a great big computer. And they put everything on that computer. Payroll, inventory, engineering, everything on one computer. Pretty soon it got overloaded. So they decided they needed more computer power. So they tried to get a bigger computer. And that's where they made their first mistake. And I think there's a good example for that. Because back in the early days of this country, when they moved heavy objects around, they didn't have any tractors or cranes or anything like that. They used oxen. And when they got a great big log on the ground, and one ox couldn't budge the darn thing, they did not try to grow a bigger ox. They used 2 oxen. And I think they're trying to tell us something. And that is, if you need greater computer power, you don't get a bigger computer, you get another computer. And that our future lies in building systems of computers. And the sooner we begin to think that way, the better. Something else has been happening, and that is we haven't looked at the applications. There are many applications in which the computer will run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on that application. We should build the computer for the application. As far as I know, just one has been built that way, and that's the one NASA built up at Goddard, the massively parallel processor. We should be building it. Customized chips, the prices come down steadily. So I'm hoping that someone's going to build that weather computer. I put together a bunch of about 6 or 7 young engineers and turn them loose. Tell them what the input data is like, tell them what the answers you want. Build a computer to do that. Because in 5 years you'll build a better one. And the custom chips, the prices are way down. As a matter of fact, the massively parallel processor costs about half what a crate did and goes twice as fast. So we can start to build the computers for the jobs they're going to do. And that's another factor in moving toward the future and getting the greater power that we need. There's something else, though, that we did kind of block this. When we got that computer, we had some data. We fed the data into a process. And the process consisted of hardware, software, communications, and trained people. Hopefully the output product was information. Since that's a system, of course, the process will have to be under some form of control, and a feedback loop from the information to control to improve the quality of the information. We spent the last 40 years talking about the process. We've had endless seminars on hardware, software, communications, training. We practically never looked at the raw material, the data, and the quality of the output product, the information. For one thing, we have today absolutely no criteria for the value of the data, for the value of the information. Yet I know darn well that any small businessman would be delighted to tell me that his accounts receivable file is much more valuable than the accounts payable file. There's a difference in the value of information. And in fact, it's 4 or 5 years ago that this article first appeared. Get over here. In Computer World. Information as a corporate asset. And he pointed out that someday, on a corporate balance sheet that comes out at the end of the year, under other assets, there would be an entry, information. Information does have a value. Large corporations are all insuring their databases against damage or illegal entry or anything else, false information. I think the insurance companies are taking them. But because we do not know what the criteria are for the value of information and therefore how we set priorities. I made awful good use of this article once. It was about 5 years ago, 4 years ago. I had to go speak to the IRS. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's always fair to pay the IRS. So having pointed out that information would appear as an asset, I just quietly asked them how they were going to depreciate the value of information. Some of the stuff's good overnight, some is good for 1,000 years. What is the value of information and how do we depreciate it? Incidentally, IRS hasn't answered me yet. Answer me again this year. Those are different principles. We have failed because we failed to set the criteria, we don't set our priorities. For instance, suppose you send a company makes widgets. And they send out a vice president with a team to go to a customer and sell $40 million worth of widgets. Now that's a very important sale. So what you should do is give him a little code. And if he wanted to call into the inventory and ask whether he had 300 widgets in a certain city, his code would give him priority over the normal updating of the inventory. We need an expert routine in there to assign priorities on the interrupts. We don't have it. Same thing applies on a ship, I would think. If radar says there's a missile coming in and it's 12 miles away, that should override and take priority over some latent information from the sonar. What are the priorities? And that depends on the value of the information. And we have totally failed to define those criteria by which we will establish the value of information. We've also failed to pretty much look at the data. It's particularly clear in the data processing world. Major Rendelman, he was then a major at Maxwell Air Force Base in 1977, began to worry about the possible cost of incorrect information in a system. He found a section of the privacy law, and what it says is if there's incorrect information in a personnel file, and that because of it someone's denied a raise or a promotion or something, they have a right to sue the agency. So he decided to find out how much it would cost to have bad information in a personnel file. And he said, let's suppose I have a file on 8,000 people. Not unusual on an air base. Then he said, let's suppose that I know that that file is 95% correct. Trust me, I don't believe in the personnel file anywhere in the country it's 95%. He said, suppose it's 95% correct. Then 5% of those records contain incorrect information. 400 of them contain incorrect information. Then he went and talked to the personnel sites and said, how many people, what effect is this going to have on people's records? And they said, well, it'll stick out, it won't match the rest of the file. And nobody takes any chances on anybody nowadays. We think in 90% of the cases, the incorrect information will cause a negative decision. That would mean 360 cases, a negative decision is taken on incorrect information. And he said, we don't know how many of those people will sue. This is at the very end of the privacy law. Most people haven't read it through. They don't know the paragraphs there. They haven't got nerve enough to sue their agency. In fact, we have no information. Therefore, by the laws of probability, we have to say the chances are 50-50. 180 of them sue the agency. Now, of course, since the incorrect information is in the file, they're bound to win their suit. So he said, let's suppose the damages are $2,000, $100 for court costs, $650 for lawyers. Each case is going to cost us $2,750. How much do we stand to lose on a 95% correct file? Well, 180 times $2,750 is almost $500,000, $495,000. Now, if you make that computation, there's no way you can go to the boss and say, give me $200,000 to correct the file and I'll save you money. We have never looked at the cost of incorrect information. We also haven't done a very good job of looking at information itself. Because information itself is totally inert. It never does anything. It's something you read on a page, you see it on a computer screen, you hear it over the telephone. It never does anything. That information still has to be fed through another process. And this time the processor is a human being who analyzes, correlates, projects that information into the future, puts his judgment into it, and turns it into something. This is a human being here, not a machine. Turns it into something we can call either intelligence or knowledge, on which we can make decisions. Now, of course, I've got a second system here, so I'll have to have a control on the process and a feedback loop to improve the quality of our material for decision making. Oh dear. No, I've got two controls. And of course, I can't do that, so I'll have to put an Admiral or a General up there. He desperately needs the expert routines to help him analyze that information. And we need to start with the small ones. For example, I can think that a captain of a ship might like one. You might call down and say, how many gallons of oil have I got in the bunker? How much oil have I got in the bunker? You can tell him so many gallons. That's an incomplete answer. You're telling me that you have so many gallons, you're steaming northwest into a northwest wind, you're using this many gallons an hour, and you keep that up for so many hours. A car will do that. But we don't have that kind of expert routine for our captains of our ships. We need to build the small expert routines, and then later we can build the large ones. Of course, the outstanding one so far is Meissen, built out of Stanford. If the doctor's treating an infection, and it's not responding, they collected all the information from all the hospitals, all the teaching hospitals, all the doctors on the treatment of infections. And you can enter and say, that I've got this and that, I've tried this and that, and it'll ask him questions. Did you look at this? Did you notice that? And then it'll tell him what treatment to try. And that has been super, absolutely marvelous for the treatment of infections. But you notice there they took a very limited area, and then they collected the information from all the experts. I'm a little afraid that as we build these expert routines, we may build the wrong expert into it. We're going to have to be very careful of that. And it's going to have to change over time. Because we'll learn more. We'll have to change even our expert systems as we learn more and do more. So we've got some other big jobs ahead of us in building the handling of information. I keep talking about building new things and doing new things. I've been watching change come to the Navy. I'm glad to report, mostly coming from the youngsters. One young lieutenant, junior grade, was ordered to a very small ship. The Navy thought it was much too small to have a computer for admin. So he took his own computer aboard with him. He very quickly got all the files in his computer, getting all the reports out on time, doing a perfectly marvelous job. When he was transferred, the captain had to buy his computer because the ship wouldn't run without it. Of a young commander of the squadron. He was told to take the squadron out for an aircraft carrier. He found that when he did, he'd have to leave the maintenance records of his planes ashore in the Naval Air Rework Facility. This didn't suit him at all. He wanted the maintenance records of his planes with him. So he went out and bought an Apple. He went over to the NAR, made friends with an ensign and a DP. A DP's a programmer. And he liberated, borrowed, stole his maintenance records out of the NAR and into his Apple. He got a case for it, put it in the space behind his seat, and flew off to the carrier with all his maintenance records and a computer with which to update them. It was highly successful. So he came back and told about it at the Department of Defense Computer Institute. And somebody looked at him and said, "Are you supposed to do that?" And he said, "I didn't ask." That brings me to the most important piece of advice that I can give, especially to the young people. If it's a good idea, if you've walked all the way around it and looked at all the what-ifs, in my case, if it's for the good of the ships and planes at sea, go ahead and do it, because it is much easier to apologize than it is to get permission. If you're a little bit afraid in a big organization, you stick your neck out like that, I'll give you a motto. A ship in port is safe. That is not what ships are built for. And I want every one of you to be good ships and sail out to sea and do the new things, because we must move toward the future. We've got to go ahead and do it. Of course, there's a certain advantage if you get as far away from Washington as possible. Because in most government organizations, travel money is severely limited. So the further you get away from Washington, the more you can go ahead and do. I recommend it highly. Of course, you might have to move to Yokosuka, Honolulu, or something like that, but it's quite effective to do that, to move toward the future. There was another case of a young electronics technician, first class, out of the Pacific Fleet. He built a computer aboard ship in his spare time. Well, the PR man of the ship thought this was out of this world, so he took a picture of the sailor with his computer and put it in Navy Times. Well, Rear Admiral Peter Cullen saw it. So he decided it would be a fine idea to write a letter to the sailor and congratulate him. And knowing how long it would take a Navy letter to get from Washington, D.C. out to a ship at sea, he put a stamp on it and sent it direct by U.S. mail. Well, the sailor decided that the Admiral could write to him directly, he could write the Admiral directly, and he did. And he thanked the Admiral for his letter. He pointed out he didn't know admirals read Navy Times, but he was glad they did. He then went on for 10 pages, both sides, single-spaced, and told the Admiral in complete detail exactly what was wrong with the computers in the Pacific Fleet and what ought to be done about it. Probably the best survey we'd ever seen. So the Admiral reached out his hand and said, "ET once later, Pacific Fleet to Norfolk." Gave him 3 more ETs and a couple of DPs and a small amount of money and told him to build the computer. In 4 months, they put it together out of off-the-shelf components, a beautiful micro with database and everything. So they set him up as the Microcomputer Evaluation Group under the Navy Regional Data Center, Norfolk. Well, they started liberating, borrowing, and otherwise acquiring microcomputers and microcomputer software. So pretty soon they knew an awful lot about microcomputers. They then decided that part of their charter and part of their job was to tell the rest of the Navy about microcomputers. And they really should put on a seminar. Now, I don't know whether you know what it takes to put on a seminar in the Navy. You have to go all the way to the top of the Navy and get permission, money, and so on, and back down again. It can take you a year. They didn't bother with any of that. With their own funds, they put a down payment on a local hall. Then they called all the manufacturers of microcomputers and said, "For $200, we'll let you exhibit your equipment, and you better be there." Sort of implied the Navy wouldn't buy the stuff otherwise, but they didn't say that because that would be illegal. They thought they might get 100 people. They had to cut it off to 500, was all they had room for. And that was the first of the Navy microcomputer seminars. The next year, under their own steam, they put it on at Monterey to educate the West Coast. The third year, 1983, was the first appearance of Navy Micro, opened by the Admiral at Virginia Beach. It's been again given every year since. This year there were over 2,500 people from all the branches of the government, and they ran it just last week in College, Germany, for everybody that's in that world. It'll be run next year out of San Diego. An extremely successful seminar on microcomputers. Well, that was fine, but they felt they'd better educate the rest of the Navy. So they set up a curriculum, and they teach the courses at Nardac, Norfolk. Prices are way below the prices charged by a Beltway bandit. When the IRS bought all the Zenith computers, they went down to Norfolk to get their training on them. And they built a beautiful curriculum all the way from introduction to microcomputers up to Lotus 1, 2, 3, and what have you. And they do a magnificent job of training people. But this wasn't all. They were really worried about the rest of the people in the Navy who couldn't get the money to travel to Norfolk. So they decided they'd better start a magazine. Now, I think it's tough to start a seminar in the Navy. Try starting a magazine. You've got to go all the way to the top of the Navy, all the way to the top of the Department of Defense, all the way to the top of the Federal Office of Personnel Management, and back down again. That would take you 3 years or so. They didn't bother with any of that. They did exactly one thing legally. They got permission from Nabisco to use the title of their magazine. It's Chips Ahoy. And they do something else, which should be of interest to everyone. They keep an inventory of software, which is government-owned, public domain software, fully tested and fully documented. It covers everything from weapon systems and avionics to data processing. And it's magnificent. And we should be using it instead of buying things from the Beltway bandits. Well, after they've been in action for about 3 years, this appeared in the front of Chips Ahoy. The Secretary of the Navy has determined that this publication is necessary in the transaction of business required by law of the Department of the Navy. Funds for printing this publication have been approved by the Navy Publications and Printing Policy. So Chips Ahoy became legal. And then last year, Public Policy Committee, the budget was cut. And so they cut chips. They said no more chips. But thank goodness, in the Navy, there's always a way. They changed the title. It's now just Chips. It's no longer a magazine, it's a NAFDAC note. And you can still get a subscription to it. All available for free software. They've done a marvelous job with it. And that was done by a bunch of sailors and gals, enlisted personnel. personnel that started the whole thing and carried it through. Well, of course, the Air Force couldn't let the Navy get away with anything like that. So, down at Gunter Air Force Base, they started Bike Line. Bike Line comes out of Gunter, and you'll find something around this is one of the early copies. You'll find something interesting about it. It was started by a bunch of lieutenants and sergeants. They managed to beat one major over the head to put his name at the top. It was a bunch of youngsters that started it. And again, a tremendous list of free, government-owned, public domain software that we should be using for all sorts of things. And just as CHIPS lost its budget, Bike Line became an official publication of the Air Force. So be sure you get a copy of Bike Line. Well, of course, the Army couldn't let the Air Force and Navy get away with it. So out of Fort Leavenworth, again, a bunch of youngsters started C²M Users Group. And again, information about microcomputers, and again, a tremendous mass of software that we shouldn't be buying over again, we should be using. And they range all the way from highly complex weapon system programs down to basic data processing. In fact, the Navy has one program called Travel Ease, which manages to put out all the reports required for handling the funding of travel. And it costs $250, fully documented, fully supported. I'm trying to sell it to the IRS because I think the IRS ought to support the Navy. It's the youngsters that are going ahead and doing things. This is not coming from the top. This is not coming from Washington. It's coming from the youngsters that go ahead and see a need and go ahead and do it. Incidentally, Slater completed his time in Norfolk and was ordered to sea in the Nassau. Well, naturally, he wanted a computer. Well, they wouldn't let him on the supply computer because he might order something. Weapon system computer? No, he'd fire a missile. Navigation computer? No, he'd get the ship off course. And he was very frustrated. He had to have a computer. He discovered that there was a vacancy on the Recreation Committee. So he got and they had some money. So he got himself elected to the Recreation Committee. He then proposed a program that we should put a computer aboard every ship in the Navy that was not part of the ship's equipment, so everybody in the Navy could start to learn to use computers. I'm glad to report there are now 6 aboard the Nassau. He completed his time aboard the Nassau. He was put in charge of the new Computer Information Center out of Nardak, San Francisco. They gave him a corner of a warehouse. Well, he liberated plasterboard. He found that one of his DPs could do some carpentry. Just how he managed to liberate the computers he's got, I don't know. I think he liberated them from Channel 8. He has probably one of the finest information system centers in the country and training the users in the use of the computers and access to the main databases and so on. Made a tremendous contribution to the Navy. 3 years ago, we commissioned him, LDO, made him an ensign in the Navy. Today he's a lieutenant junior grade. When he had to make the decision, he elected to stay in the Navy, even though he'd been offered huge sums by contractors in the industry, because the Navy had given him the opportunity to do things. And he's now a lieutenant junior grade serving in the Navy. And one of the nicest things about that swearing-in ceremony was that the Admiral had written a letter to originally. Sir Admiral Collins came back to be present when he was sworn in as an officer. They're out there, these youngsters, the bright ones, who are willing to go ahead and stick their necks out and do things. We've got to lead them on and encourage them and give them a chance. That certainly shows those 3 stories. Incidentally, that commander took his maintenance records with him to sea. He came back and told about it at Navarre about 5 years ago. And you know what Navarre did? They set up a committee. And the committee spawned 3 more committees. About 5 years later, the commander of the squadron has a computer and has the maintenance records of his planes. Somebody had to go ahead and do it the first time. Somebody had to stick their necks out and be a good ship and sail out to sea. And I would challenge all of you to do just that. So this is one of the things we will face as we move into the future. Now, something else we didn't notice about that darn data. We didn't notice that some was incorrect. We didn't notice how data behaves. come around to shoulder the mountain. They come down to a little pond. It's a little dam. And it runs a small mill, a lumber mill. And there's a standpipe to supply water to the local people. And people around the edge of the pond use the water. Only part of the water goes on downstream. Bulk of it's used locally. A lot more of these streams come together, configurations just like this. They come into a bigger pond, and there's a bigger dam. And there may be 3 or 4 mills, and a generating station, and farms use the water. The water's used locally. Only part of it goes on downstream, maybe down to Lake Winnipesaukee or something. It's a great big lake. Lots of dams now. Lots of generating power, lots of mills, lots of people using the water. Only part of it goes on downstream to the sea. We fail to notice that this is just the way data and information behave. The branch of the Agriculture Department needs detailed information about their farmers. Detailed information of what he's planting, what the loans are, everything, which is not needed at county level. They consolidate the information, add it up, and send the totals to county level. County in turn consolidates, and each of the counties sends to state level. And again, they consolidate, and then send the totals to Washington. We've made the mistake over the years of sending everything to Washington. We should have been leaving the data where it's used, and send the totals, consolidated information down to the system. This could be a manufacturing plant. The supervisor out on the floor needs detailed information about his men and his machines. He needs to know which machine's been online going beautifully, which has had a couple of breakdowns, which man's apt to be late, so on and so forth. He needs detailed information about his men and his machines. It is not needed by the plant manager. The plant manager needs to know how many blanks came in and how many widgets did you stamp out. How much was the total payroll? How much is going to Social Security? How much the taxes? He needs totals. Plant manager needs detail which is not required at division level. He totals and sends it to division level. And division again totals and sends it to corporate level. And we totally fail to notice how information, particularly data processing information, actually flows. Now there's a second parallel system of communications in this, and that is when we head corporate headquarters back to ask questions. We get orders and directives. And parallel is the same network. We have failed to look at how data and information actually travel and where it is actually used. And up to the present time, at least in government, we tend to send everything to Washington. We never should have done it, because now we can't even find it most of the time. Now it's too slow to process. And we've accumulated tremendous amounts of data in huge databases. There's an answer to that, too. And again, it's a case where we haven't used our common sense. Way back in 1977, the Bell Labs first proposed using an auxiliary machine to store the data for a large mainframe. And they showed it would go faster and cost less. And nobody paid any attention. In '74, they published a paper, Back-End Computer for Database Management. It conclusively showed that it would be better to have a specially built machine to manage the data and feed it to the large mainframe. Nobody paid any attention. In '77, the Army Research Group at Georgia Tech actually did it, used a computer to manage the data for another computer, and finally proved it out and out. It would go faster and cost less. It was not until 1982 when we were able to put our first database machine in the Navy, because we couldn't change people's minds. It was way back in 1945 that Howard Hathaway Aiken had said we would have auxiliary pieces of equipment. And we thought only of printers and plotters, but we could have a database machine. When they finally decided to put a database machine in the Navy under my basic principles, I suggested they put it as far from Washington as possible. And I suggested either Yokosuka or Honolulu. They finally put it at Point Magoo, which is as far west as you can get on the continent of the United States. It supports the research people at Point Magoo and China Lake. It's highly successful. The second database machine went in up at Newport. It contains the anti-submarine warfare surveillance system. And the third one went in at Nardec, Washington, and supports a data processing installation. We've got to recognize that we need auxiliary machines to manage our huge databases. I think one of the things that always bothered me about they took my RAM memory application's memory. And the first thing they did was load an operating system into it to let that permanent. Then they proceeded to load in the database management system. Then they loaded in a whole section of I/O protocol. Why the heck shouldn't that operating system be out on a separate chip? Simply because we've never asked for it. It should be there. It shouldn't be in the main memory. Put the database management system out on an auxiliary piece of equipment. Put that I/O stuff out on another chip. And give me back my main memory for my applications and the problems I'm trying to solve. This is another direction in which we must think of going. Something happened with the database machines too. Of course, it didn't come from government. It came from a little insurance company up in the state of Maine. They looked at their data and they said, hey, all this data belongs to our policyholders. It's personal, it has to be protected. All this data belongs to running our company. We want everybody to access it. Gee, we've got two databases. They put in two database machines. So I will predict for the future that you will build systems of computers and systems of databases. And this is the direction in which we must go. We're going to get the speed and response time that we require. We must build the systems of the computers and systems of databases. I think it's beginning to happen. We're beginning to get database machines in the Department of Defense, because it happens to be rather interesting that the group which has made the best use of database machines so far is the Coast Guard. I think that's probably because they're a little smaller and can afford to be a little more ingenious. They've done by far the best job in handling the database machines. There's some reference to that here. We now have them in the Air Force and the Navy, and they're beginning to expand. And people are beginning to recognize that if you have a bulk of classified data, you put it in one database, and you put your other data that's open in another database machine. Common sense. Build a machine that is a relational database, and it's going to go faster and cost less than if you try to use a general purpose computer to be a database manager. And we fail to recognize that, to break the things down into pieces and build the systems of the pieces, of the computers, and of the specialized pieces of equipment. Of course, we're up against another problem now. As I understand it, if you detonated an A-bomb about 250 miles up above the center of the country, you do no damage on the ground or to any person, but it would emit an electromagnetic pulse, which would take out all the power lines and all the telephone lines and all the computers in the country. And we must protect against the electromagnetic pulse. Fortunately, there's an answer. It's the optical. As you all know, the optical cable started, the first one I think was Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, Chicago, Washington, San Francisco, Washington. They're now putting them along all the railroads because they've already got the right of way. The optical cable is steadily increasing. And it was last summer that Bell Labs first showed, well, I guess it was first done up at MIT in about '83. They had the optical analog of a transistor, an optical transistor. And last summer, Bell Labs showed the first of the chips, which had multiple optical transistors on it. So there's little doubt that we will very soon, they predicted in this article in Business Week, that we would have optical computers by 1990. Now, of course, I'm willing to admit that most of the first ones will go to NASA to defense, and soon after that we'll get them out in the commercial world. But to use those optical computers, we're going to have to change people's minds. Can you imagine the day that I tried to tell an admiral that I'm going to send his messages on photons instead of electrons, and he just found out what an electron was? And I'm going to start saying photons? We're going to have a tremendous job as we move toward the optical to replace the electronic. We're going to have to change people's minds and give them some confidence in this new way of doing things and the new way of going, because we must get the speed. There's another advantage, of course, in the optical. You can't listen to an optical cable and you can't tap it, because you can't listen to light. And if you tap an optical cable, you destroy the signal. So for confidential and other things like that. And then, of course, will come the question that if you're traveling at optical speeds, it's going to be much faster to go in an optical cable along the ground than it is to go up to a satellite and come down again. So those optical cables are, if you will, a threat to the satellites, so we'll still need them for intercontinental. There's going to be a lot of changes ahead. We're going to do things differently. And the sooner we recognize it and start moving toward the future, the easier it's going to be to do all of this. Now, of course, I'm asking people to stick their necks out. There's one major difficulty. There's always a line out here, and that line represents what your boss will believe at a given moment in time. And if you step over the line, you don't get the budget. You have a double responsibility, that line. You have to know where it is and not step over it. But you also have to continue to educate the boss. Don't you move the line further out, so next time you can go a little further into the future. I'd like to show you how easy it is to step over that line, because I did it once beautifully. It was back in 1952 that I wrote the first compiler. Of course, nobody believed it. I was promptly told that computers couldn't write programs, only people could do that. I just said I was giving people a shorthand. The first compiler, A0, was a mathematical compiler. It took 2 years to get people to even try it when it was already working. And then I learned something else. I learned that there are a large number of people in the world who don't like symbols. They hate symbols. They want to use words. And they were in the field of data processing. So I said, okay, now I'll build a compiler. You will write your program in English statements, and I will translate the machine code. I was promptly told that I couldn't do that. This time the reason was that computers couldn't understand English words. Now that's how I never expected any computer anywhere to understand anything. All I was going to do was compare bit patterns. But the concept was so totally alien that nobody would listen. So the only thing to do was go ahead and do it. So we built a compiler. It wouldn't take more than 20 statements. But it had all the controls in it. And it translated English statements into machine code. This was in 1955. So we said, put this report together to ask for a budget to build a full-scale compiler. And we sent it to management. And to convince management this could be done, we said, look, we've got a little program here in English. If you will come down to the machine room, we'll feed the English into the computer, get out a machine-coded program, and run it for you. And this thing read, input inventory file A, price file B. Compare product number A with product number B. If greater, go to operation 10. If equal, go to operation 5. Otherwise, go to operation 2. Transfer A to D, write item D, jump to operation 8. It ended up rewind B, close out file C, and D, and stop. Those of you who know COBOL will find this was an ancestor of COBOL. But that looked awfully small. And we were asking for the biggest budget we'd ever asked for. So we decided we'd do something better. We wrote a program that went into the compiler, located all the English words and told us where they were, and we replaced them. We said, dear kind, wonderful manager, we'd also like to do this program for you. And this would read, Donne amatele sa fridis ve, compare provino la e provino ve, si superior alina prasim is, si egal alina prasim 5, autrement alina prasim 2. Prospere ande, privede, sote alina prasim 8. Ended up honorably being feminist in Narete. Love to run this French program for you. Well, if you do something once, it's an accident. If you do it twice, it's a coincidence. But if you do it 3 times, you uncover the natural law. Next, we changed the words again. The third program was the impressive one. Eingabe Inventar. Walk number bay, when große, oh, the beautiful words in this one. Übertrage aus a day, schreibe day, Schlungzu. Schlungzu. Ended up Rockland to be stopped. Love to run this German program for you. Have you figured out what happened to us? That thing hit the fan. It was absolutely obvious that a respectable American computer built in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania could not possibly understand French or German. And I had to spend the next 4 months saying, no, 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 we wouldn't think of doing such a thing. We're only going to program it in English. I stepped over that doggone line. Even though it worked. As you probably know, COBOL is used around the world today. But do you realize they don't translate to the other languages? If you look at a COBOL program in Japan, you will find the verbs and the connecting words in English and Roman characters, and the nouns in Kanjo and Japanese characters. I'm just looking stuff. Those verbs are known around the world. I made very good use of it once. I got left behind in an installation in Japan with no one who spoke English. And I wanted to get back to my hotel. And I made noises. And they were lovely people. They gave me a cup of coffee and took me to the ladies' room. I was getting in my hotel. Well, I finally remembered Kobo. And I said, move. Go to Osaka Hotel. And they moved. Country, remember football, and be able to communicate. Well, we had it working, and then we had to persuade people that they could write programs in English. I think it's something we don't often recognize. We have to actually sell, market a new idea. You've got to tell the guy why it's going to do him some good, why he can get something out of it. It's a marketing job. Well, eventually we had Westinghouse and U.S. Steel and Edna were used writing programs in English. IBM came out with Commercial Translator. Honeywell came out with DAC. Looked as if we were going to have many data processing languages. Now those of us who wanted it, wanted. But John Baptist was at IBM, I was at UNIVAC. We were different. Howard Bromberg was at RCA. If we sat down and agreed on anything, we'd be breaking the antitrust laws. And our companies weren't about to let us do that. The only way we could work together is under the aegis of the university or the government. So we went first to Dr. Saul Gorham, the University of Pennsylvania, and said, call a meeting for us, and he did. We were all in agreement what we wanted to do. But Penn thought it was going to get too big for them to sponsor. So we decided to go to the Department of Defense. We went to Charles Phillips, who was then the controller of the Department of Defense, and said, will you sponsor this? He said, I've got to find out if it's needed. He called a meeting in the Pentagon, and never since, or before, have I seen in one room so much power to commit men and money as I saw that day. He had representatives of every government agency, all the manufacturers of computers, and all the biggest users of computers. DuPont, John Hancock, Steel, everybody. They were in complete agreement. Yes, they wanted one data processing language, and yes, it should be English. It had been shown to be feasible, and yes, we should have started 3 years ago. So they set up the organization known today as CODISL, Conference on Data Systems Languages, and they in turn set up the Programming Language Committee and told them to take the best out of the existing languages and define COBOL, a common business-oriented language, and they went hard to work. Less than a year later, there were rumors all over the industry that COBOL was dead, or if it wasn't dead, it was time. This upset people terribly, particularly it upset Howard Bromberg. He was the RCA man. Finally, one day, he was driving down the road. He happened to drive past a place where they sold gravestones, model cemetery monuments, and he was worrying about the possible death of COBOL. He went in and bought one of the tombstones. It's a beautiful piece of white marble about this high. It has a carved reclining lamb on the top of it, and he got a reduced price because the lamb's ears were chipped. He had the word COBOL cut in the front of it, and then he shipped the tombstone to Mr. Phillips in the Pentagon, express collect. Someday you want to hear the story about what security did when it appeared. The story got out. A large number of us helped the story get out. The whole tempo turned around, the support came back, and we went ahead and defined the language known as COBOL. That tombstone was the turning point. Incidentally, 2 years ago, we took it up to the Computer Museum in Boston. And if you go to Boston sometime, you can see the famous tombstone in the Computer Museum. That was the turning point in the development of the COBOL language. Now, that's not the best way in the world to make our decisions. We should have a better way of getting together and defining what we need in the future and getting the support for it. On the other hand, we frequently have a tendency to go too far. I've enjoyed this paper ever since it was first written. Wouldn't it be nice if we could write computer programs in ordinary English? Or would it? By I.D. Hill, the UK Medical Research Council. He says, no, we don't want to write computer programs in ordinary English, but it sure would be nice if we could tell people what to do in programming languages. And I'd like to give just one of his examples. He says, consider the following from a shampoo bottle. Probably what's on your shampoo bottle. For best results, wet hair with warm water. Gently work in the first application. Rinse thoroughly and repeat. He says, repeat from where? Surely the rule must be that in the absence of other information, we repeat from the first instruction. But this means we have to wet the hair we've just rinsed. Let's use a little common sense and not bother with that. But the next instruction refers to the first application. do that again, so perhaps the doctor tells us to leave that one out. So the only thing left to repeat is rinse thoroughly and repeat. And now we're on a closed loop and must continue rinsing our hair. He says how much clearer it would be to say, for best results, begin. Wet hair with warm water. J equals 1, 2, gently work in application J, rinse thoroughly, N. And of course that's the alcohol program for rinsing your hair. So I did not expect to see anything like that on a shampoo bottle within my lifetime. But I think it is something to be desired, far more than desiring to write plain English for computers. So we have to be careful not to go too far. Well, it finally got to be 1966, and I got a letter from the Chief of Naval Personnel, aimed directly at me personally. And the first paragraph said, "You have completed 23 years in the reserves, which is more than 20. And I knew that. The second paragraph was even more direct. It said, "You have attained age 60, and I knew that too. And the third paragraph said, "Here are the blanks. Please apply for retirement." So I did. And I met the saddest day of my life, the 31st of December, 1966. I was officially placed in the Naval Reserve retired list with the rank of commander. Thanks to our highly automated pension system, I got my first pension check on the 1st of April. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Pentagon to come down to Washington. We want to talk to you. So I came running as I was due when the Navy sent for me. I had to wait in Mr. Reed's outer office. And there were 2 captains there. Being on my commander, I spoke to them very pleasantly and respectfully. But somehow or other, I managed to tell those 2 men, my Aunt, the captain's young nowadays. And you know what happened? One of them turned out to be my new commanding officer, so I was on the right foot. Mr. Ream took one look at me and said, "The Navy payrolls have been written over 800 times. I'd like you to return to active duty for the job of standardizing high-level languages and getting the whole Navy to use them." I allowed us how the first half of the job was finite, the second was infinite, but I'd be glad to make a start. And so I reported on the 1st of August, 1967, on 6 months temporary active duty. It turned out to be 20 years. As the Navy personnel, they gave me 1 civilian, 1 lieutenant, 2 DP3s, and a secretary, and an office in the 5th deck of the Pentagon. That's the attic. Later we were promoted to the 3rd basement. Have you ever been in the 3rd basement of the Pentagon? It's an extraordinarily interesting area. The cockroaches are 4 inches long, and they're hungry. Even 2 before to hit them. They gave us each a desk and a chair and a pad and a pencil. Standardize the high-level languages and start with COBOL. Well, since I was initiating a new Navy activity, the first thing I did was go out and buy a copier. The second thing I did was teach my new crew the techniques the Chief had taught me during World War II. And I'd like to assure you that our new Navy men and women are just as good as any World War II man ever was. It only took them 2 weeks to completely furnish the office. Chief's full advice. The Chief always said, if you need something, first you liberate from the Air Force. They have everything. If you can't find it there, you liberate from the Army. They have almost everything, and they don't know how to count it. There's no use trying to liberate anything from the Marines or the Seabees, because they liberated it to begin with. I find the old techniques still hold. They did a marvelous job of furnishing the office. The only day we nearly got in trouble, they turned up with a coffee table like they have down in the Secretary's office. The captain took one look at it and said, "Where'd you get that?" I remembered what the Chief had told me to do. I just stood perfectly straight and said, "Captain, it wasn't bolted down." So that became one of our mottos. If it isn't bolted down, bring it home. We accumulated some of the darndest things. As a matter of fact, eventually the junior officers at NAVCONSAC gave us our own flag. It's a beautiful nylon boat flag with garments and everything. It was on a pole beside my desk as long as we were in the Pentagon. And it was a skull and crossbones. And to the best of my knowledge, we were the only office ever in the entire Pentagon to openly fly the Jolly Roger and operate under its aegis. We lived on Slack. Now, Slack is not something the managers, the MBAs, do not understand. Slack is the little bit of give that has to be in anything that operates. No good chief operator of a computer system will ever schedule a computer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You lose 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there for the things that happen when you run computers. My crew made friends with every single operating computer in the Pentagon. If they didn't need their slack time, they'd call us and say, can you use 5 minutes? And we'd go run that computer. Which meant our programs had to run on everyone's computer. And we proved we could do it. 2.5 years later, we had a set of programs which would tell us whether or not a COBOL compiler did, in fact, meet and fully implement the American National Standards Institute standard. I was invited to give a presentation to the Secretary of the Navy. Will be Secretary, Undersecretary, Assistant Secretary, Chief Naval Operations, all the Vice Admirals, everything. They rehearsed me for 2 weeks ahead of time. I went through one dry run after another. We finally got to the great and wonderful morning, and I was walking down the executive corridor beside the captain. He looked down at me and says, first time a woman ever gave a presentation in that room. That was so I feel more at ease. Further, he says, first time anybody below the rank of captain ever gave a presentation in that room. He had me in good shape for the day. So I wrote in the speech and told the secretary, it was just as well we hadn't had a budget. Because if we had had one, I'd still be filling out the papers to get our first hour of computer time. But I managed to get through to the end, and he was a charming gentleman. He thanked me, he congratulated me. Then he said, is there anything we can do to help you? Now, I had not been briefed on how to answer that question, so I waded right in. I said, yes, I wanted 2 more DPs, 2 more programmers, and $20,000 to survey the users of COBOL to see what they needed next. And he said he'd see what he could do about it, and that whole room collapsed in one brawl of laughter. Boy, did I get out the door. I looked at the captain and said, well, what did I do this time? He said, don't you realize nobody ever asked for less than 20 million in that room before? 20,000 and 2 more DPs, only to run into an extremely serious problem with our DPs in the Pentagon. We found there was a very large number of civilians, and even a few officers, who were not about to listen to a young man or woman who wore a sailor suit, even though they were trained experts. It got so bad, the captain finally said we will have to take them out of uniform. I don't think I ever regretted anything more than I did the day I told those youngsters, take off your uniforms so people will listen to you. I had personal cards printed for each one of them with a Navy SEAL in the corner, and I made them all managers. Not George M. Baird, DP3. This is the George M. Baird, Managers Test and Evaluation. Boy, I had a wonderful effect on the civilians. They're scared of managers. I find we have an extraordinarily bad habit lately of underestimating our young people. And young people is anybody that's half my age or less. I don't know where it happened. I think it's largely the fault of the media, TV, the radio, the news magazines. They tell us only about the 20% of the youngsters that are no good. They never tell us about the 80% who are the brightest, the healthiest, the most eager to learn that we've ever had in the history of this country. I've seen them all across the country. I watched 3rd graders in Independence, Missouri. They were writing programs in BASIC and debugging, doing a beautiful job of it. They're out there, the brightest young people we've ever had. And they're looking for something. And the thing they're looking for is positive leadership. That was the second thing they told me when I left Michigan School. They said, your primary job will be to provide leadership. And leadership is a two-way street. It's loyalty up and loyalty down. Respect for your superior, keep them informed, make suggestions. Superior, take care of your crew. For instance, in my case, I decided that every member of the crew should be able to get on their feet and give a report and not say, you know. So I with a slot on it, if they said, you know, during a report, they had to put a quarter in. They didn't take the quarters, but it tied up their capital. You'd be surprised how fast they learned not to say, you know. When they could give a report and not say, you know, there was a reward. When I was invited to give a presentation for an assistant secretary or an admiral or something, I would arrive with my whole crew strung out after me. And this doesn't mean giving a report. I would introduce them one by one to give the report on their part of the work. And I swear I watched those youngsters go 2 inches when an admiral said, well done. How often do we remember to give praise when praise is due? How often do we remember to say thank you, that was a good job? Well done. That's part of leadership as well. We need it. We need this. Those young people are the future of this country. We need to provide for them the best leadership we can. I know they're the healthiest because they've had vitamin pills all their lives long. I had to eat tablespoons full of emulsified cod liver oil. They're out there, the brightest young people we've ever had, and they're looking for that positive leadership. I don't know where we lost it. Somewhere at the end of World War II, we went overboard on management. Everything could be done by management. We have filled Washington with MBAs and lawyers, and we've forgotten about leadership, which is the real way to get things done. Because no computer will ever ask a new reasonable question or figure out how to answer it. It takes people to do that. We've got to recognize that all our equipment and everything under the sun is no good without the right people who can ask the new questions and find out how to answer those questions. And we need every one of those youngsters to bring them up if we're going to have a good future. Only one outfit never forgot those principles, and that was the Marines. And I think if I had a Marine standing beside me, what he would say would be, when the going gets rough, you cannot manage a man into combat. You must lead. And you might add, you manage things. You lead people. We need it not alone in the armed forces. We need it in government. We need it in business. We need it in industry. We need to bring back our original concepts that we once had in this country of true, positive leadership and provide it for our young people and for those who are coming after us. And no matter what job any one of you is doing, your primary responsibility is to provide that leadership. That's the future of your agency, and that's the future of this country. And we must provide it for our young people. And we must get very busy and move toward it. And we can follow the excellent example of the Marines. Well, eventually our programs were accepted, and the order went out which said all compilers brought into the inventory of the Department of Defense should be tested. And you nations should set up a compiler testing service. So we started testing all the compilers, COBOL and Fortran at that time. That was fine, but it left out the rest of the federal government. So the National Bureau of Standards came and got a copy of our programs and gave them a tape. That was all right until 2 weeks later, and then was I mad. Our programs had been putting at the top of every test, U.S. Navy compiler test. I found a list in Washington, they were putting out NBS compiler tests. Boy, was I mad. Well, they came around and wanted an updated set of the programs, and I said I wasn't going to give them one. I was promptly told that politically I must cooperate with the National Bureau of Standards. So I thought about it for 2 whole days. And then I gave them a new tape, and as I handed it to them, I promised them, if they again attempted to change U.S. Navy into NBS, it would blow their operating system off their computer. Eventually we held a peace conference, and exchanged our prisoners of war. The National Bureau of Standards delegated to the Navy the job of testing all compilers for the entire federal government. This continued until about 4 or 5 years ago, at which time the Appropriation Committee of the House of Representatives made an absolutely horrifying discovery. They discovered that the Navy was performing a federal function. In that total and complete horror of such a thing, they picked the compiler testing service out of the Navy and put it over in the General Services Administration. We took most of our people with them. They've done a pretty good job with it. Last January, they turned the job over to the National Bureau of Standards. And 4 times, sometimes 6 times a year, they publish this document, Certified Compiler List. It lists all the compilers for BASIC, Fortran, Pascal, COBOL, and Ada, which have been tested and shown to meet and completely implement the standards. So one piece of software you can buy and know that it will actually work. And they're listed by manufacturer and by operating system, so that you know what you're getting when you buy a compiler. I'm tremendously proud of what those youngsters have accomplished. 2 have received the Navy Achievement Award for their work on the test routines. One of them, she was a second-class petty officer. Everybody in the Pentagon said you couldn't put COBOL on an 8K computer, so they decided to do it. She led a group of 4. In 4 months, they put COBOL on an 8K machine when everybody said it couldn't be done. She completed her courses at American University, so I said, let's send her off to candidate school. They said she can't because she'll be 3 months too old when she graduates. I went downstairs at a rapid rate of speed and said, I want to wait with her. Incidentally, that's another thing that's true of the Navy that I tell all the young people. If they say no, say I want a waiver. If they say no again, take back your request and put more words in it and dress it up a little bit and try again. If they say no a second time, go find a chief and he'll tell you how to get around it. No organization can operate without Navy chiefs. You better get some. They are marvelous at getting things done. We got a waiver first. She went to OCS, later went to Monterey, got her master's in computer science. Recently, she's a lieutenant, today a lieutenant commander. She served as my aide. Now she's going out to the Nordic, Honolulu. Those youngsters are out there, the brightest we've ever had. You need them. We need them. We've got to give them the opportunity and the leadership and the chance to accomplish things. And when they come with a great idea, let them try it. Don't say, no, we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. Probably didn't have the equipment to do it then. You remember Mr. Babbage? He designed the analytical engine back in about 1812. In Mr. Babbage's engine, there was a mill and a store. All the data was put in the storage. The programs were put in the mill. That was fine. Mark I was built that way, Mark II. And then along came von Neumann, and he said, no, I want to put the program in the store so that I can change it. And the reason he wanted to modify the instructions was so he could do indexing. We don't need that anymore. We've got index registry. Suppose we put the data in the store and the program in the mill. What difference would it make? It would make this difference. We no longer have to go to the storage to get the next instruction and bring it to the instruction registry. We could shoot them out one right after another to the mill, out of the mill, and we could double the speed of the computer without doing anything else. It's time we look back. Some concepts that are very good. It could not be implemented at the time because we didn't have the equipment. Remember, Babbage was trying to build a mechanical computer. Same thing was true of Mark II. We built it during the war. We couldn't get any vacuum tubes because they were all going into the radar. So we had to build her out of relays. I don't think anybody's looked at Mark II since. But Mark II was unique. It was the first of the multiprocessors. Because under program control, you could operate Mark II as all one computer. You could split into two computers that operated in parallel, side by side, and exchange the data through the transfer registry. Then again, under program control, you could throw back into being one computer again, or split her into two. That logic hasn't been looked at since, because everybody thinks it's beneath it. You should have built out a relays. But the logic is still a 1-0 logic. We could bring some of that to the fore today and try some of those ideas again. We could use some from Mr. Babbage. We could use some from Mark II. So we need both history, and we need to dream of the future. We need to accept the new ideas and try it. And when the youngsters come to me and say, we can put COBOL on an X-ray machine, and I know darn well everybody in the Pentagon says we can, I say, go ahead and try it. They're full of new ideas. Some of them are darn good. We've got to let them try things. We've got to move to the future. Try the new things. Be good ships. Sail out to sea. Never, never, never say we've always done it that way. For myself, I've probably spent as exciting a life as anybody's spent. I've loved every minute of it. I've also received most of the awards that are given to anyone in the computer industry. And each time I've received one, I've told you something I'd like to repeat to you. I have already received the highest award I will ever receive, no matter how long I live, no matter how many more jobs I may have. And that has been the privilege and the responsibility of serving very proudly in the United States Navy. Thank you. We should move in that direction and start improving it. We're asking for it on all of the Navy computers now, as well as whatever operating system comes with it. ideas coming. Gotta buy them, gotta go use them, gotta try them out, yes.
Do you think ADA will be significant?
I think we need ADA. I think we need it very badly, because jovial had gotten completely non-standard. It was splattered all over everywhere. We badly needed a language for the embedded computers, for the avionics computers, the weapon systems computers. And if we use ADA for that, it'll be highly successful. But something new sometimes becomes a buzzword, and everybody gets on board. And there are a large number of people who think ADA can have one language that'll do everything. And they're trying to move ADA out into data processing. And this will kill it if they do it. In fact, there's one general that's already telling the Army to use ADA for everything. You remember what happened to PL1? Shared, the IBM users group designed the new programming language to replace Fortran. And it was beautiful. But IBM would not support it unless it also covered COBOL. So they shoehorned the data processing into it and made it into PL1. Too big, too complex, too slow, and it's dying. Because they tried to use it for everything, not for what it was designed for. If we use ADA for the weapon systems, for the avionics, for the embedded computers, it's just what we need. But if we let people pull it out to use it for payroll and inventory, we're going to kill it. I have yet to see a tax computation for the IRS that involves sons and cosines. We should use the language in the world in which it was defined. And incidentally, if you want to find something out for us, a pretty good critique of ADA, April, IEEE Spectrum had an excellent article entitled here, ADA from Promise to Practice, question mark. Top-notch article. The April IEEE Spectrum. And that Institute for Software Institute at Carnegie Mellon has an excellent report on ADA. You better get it and read it. Because we need it for the embedded systems. But at the present time, most of the compilers being built by the Beltway bandits and validated as implementing all the statements and implementing them correctly. They're not validating the object code. And the object code is too big and too slow. But we've got a lot of work to do. Yes?
What about structured programming? Are we moving more toward structure?
Structure is fine for one thing, some things, but it's lousy for payroll. The danger lies in saying use it for everything. It does work for the mathematical or computational systems. It doesn't always work in data processing. Again, it's the danger of seeing something good and trying to spread it too far. Structure should be used in the computational world. And most of the computational people are moving in that direction. You know what I mean? It's a different kind of program. In doing payroll, there's no use jumping to the subroutine does Social Security. You might as well have it in line, it's faster. Because you're not going to use it over again. You're only going to compute Social Security once in each paycheck. Thank goodness. Yes?
Does the Navy have, you mentioned expert systems briefly, what does the Navy have ongoing in the development of expert systems?
There's a very large group at the Naval Research Laboratory who are dedicating their lives to expert systems. I don't know what they're doing. I have a sneaky suspicion they're going to fight a whole naval battle. But I still think we need to answer the captain of the ship on how much oil he has in the bunker first. Do the little pieces. No engineer ever designs something all in one model. He breaks it down into the separate pieces and he designs the components and the interfaces. There's another principle. They talk about software engineering. I think it's mostly software and very little engineering. Because this compiler that I have here, which is the original first English language compiler, is very interesting. It ran on Univac 1, way back in the beginning of time. And it has several outputs. It had as output the object program, And then it had a record, which was a list of every statement and where it would be put in the final program. But you could always go from the original statement to the actual code and find it. Then it had a storage list. For each quantity mentioned in the program, it gave you a picture of the quantity and then showed where it had been put throughout the program. Then there were two test routines. One was called the test routine, and it took the record of the storage list, generated correct data, and saw to it that it got correct answers. The other one, the audit routine, generated incorrect data, and saw to it that the program properly tracked it. And the compiler itself knew where everything had been put. Not some trace routine you put on later, but the compiler that wrote the program gave you the information to test the program. Now that's the way an engineer would have done it. For instance, if you buy a car, the engineers put a little, you can pull a little stick out and wipe it off with waste and put it back in and tell me you need oil or not. The engineer built the ability to test and maintain into the system. And that's what we should be doing with our programs. Now what happened to this was running on UNIVAC 1, and sometimes it was as long as 2 or 3 hours to compile a program. So they said, you can't waste your time on all those lists. They took them out. They've never been seen since. Now, of course, on today's computers, the speed they travel at, we can make compilers deliver us the information by which we can test the program. We hadn't asked for it. So, again, we can learn from the past. Yes?
These, you're talking about connecting computers together. You see the interfaces coming along that will allow that to happen? Or is there more work that's needed?
Well, there are some computers that all talk to each other. The whole DEC series all talk to each other from the microvacs all the way to the VAX cluster. And if you want 2 pieces of IBM equipment to talk to each other, you get a Zenith or a DEC and put them in between and they'll talk to each other. But you can, and now, just this last week, Apple and DEC are going to talk to each other. Just beginning to happen. It's available for most of them. It's bound to happen. I'd much rather have a VAX cluster than I would a big mainframe. 4 computers instead of 1. Running in parallel, communicating with each other. Do much more. Then we'll build the big ones like the NASA-guided massively parallel processor. That's a few. That's out of this world. Which goes to show that you put your own. I wish you all would get together and build a weather computer. You need a simple one. Are there some young engineers here that are willing to stick their necks out? You know, liberate a few chips. Put a few together, prove you can do it, and then go to management and say, look, we'd like to build a weather machine. Somebody started. Somebody's got to go ahead and do it. Because it could be done very quickly. Any more? As a maverick, I never would have gotten to be a rear admiral if I hadn't gone ahead and done it. I would encourage all the youngsters to go ahead and do things. You can always apologize later. Oh, gee, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that.
Admiral Hopper, we'd like to thank you very much for an informative and interesting program tonight. You gave a lot of advice to all of us, and I know some of us are going to have trouble with our young engineers come tomorrow. wanted, right? And that's what we all want,
They
too.
can all quote me.
That's right. And that's a lot of good advice there. So we're going to take our nano wires, our radios, and go. But we thank you again, and we'd like to show our appreciation with one. We understand you like chocolates and strawberries, so that's a little basket of that.
Thank you very,
Left
very
over
much.
from last Easter. And then from all of us here at the center, we'd like to give you a photo of the shuttle lifting off
Wonderful.
and a little plaque at the
You
bottom.
know, I
Thank
would like
you for
to
your
find
help.
out how I can put in my application. I'd like to be the first senior citizen to fly on a shuttle. All these youngsters, you even threaten to take the press, I think you ought to give a senior citizen a That's beautiful.
Well, we appreciate it very much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you again.
Thanks.
And with that, we'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we'll see you the next time.
Nanoseconds and picoseconds.
Don't forget the nanos right here, and drive carefully going home. We need all of you, so until next time, thanks again.